Welcome back, YouTubers, to my podcast of Aspie Answers as your host, Aspie Answers. So, as you're aware, I'm talking about in the episode 3 that is taking longer than expected, which I humbly apologise in advance, on the self-diagnosis versus the diagnostic series, because I feel that many of these series that I'm about to address, or episodes especially, that are close to my heart to share with you all, to educate and hopefully learn from each other based on our lived experiences, or just learn from each other in general. So, I am hoping right now, once I continue on to episode 3 of the self-diagnosis, this is the diagnosis series, that you have been enjoying most of the series in this episode and previous episodes. So please kindly give me feedback somewhere, either through my social medias or in my comment section once it comes live onto YouTube with the next following series in episode 3 of the self-diagnosis versus the diagnosis series. It would be much appreciated. The last one we got up to before I was MIA again was getting an adult autism diagnosis. Is it worth it or not? This one had obviously covered basically similarly to the very first one of the pros and cons, where I added some pros and cons lists just to give you guys a fair idea of making a decision. It's worth getting autism diagnosis or not versus self-diagnosing or not. But as I said before, that many people have their reasons. So in this case, however, today I'm going to be bringing out to you all why people self-diagnose autism. Is it right? That's the question that we usually question ourselves as autistics, and not just autistics but people in the mental health community also. I have clearly shared with you all about my diagnosis story and journey with Aspergers syndrome. That is in episode 1 of the podcast of getting to know me better as an autistic person, and just getting to know me and journey behind this diagnosis as well as live on my channel, which I'll link in the description box below you if you're going to be watching this when it comes live. This is just to give you a newbie out there a bit just of what I am like as an autistic, or just as a person behind the diagnosis. I don't usually like using the term label, because labels belong on, clothes tags and what have you, but I want to call it as a diagnosis. And in saying this also, just to get to know me again, for those listening or watching who are new, I'm Aspie Answers. I'm the host of Aspie Answers on my podcast, my YouTube channel. I educate and advocate about mental health and autism, as well as also navigating through life with autism and mental health, taking you on a journey when I'm able, fun and games, as well as sharing my lived experiences with tips and advice behind it. So I'm going to quickly go briefly today about my diagnosis before we get straight into the main point of this podcast today. So while I was growing up, that my parents noticed that there was something different about me, as I had to, when growing up, go to a specialist of a speech therapist. That was during my time after I was at preschool, or during my preschool year. That was also based close to my primary school years as I was transitioning. I had to do this obviously because at this point in time, the reason being behind it, as I said, my parents felt something was not quite right. They couldn't put a finger on it at the time due to my diagnosis. Also, they figured, as well as some of the specialists that we went to, felt that I had some learning disabilities as well as some other condition, if you will, before the diagnosis came about of autism. In my early teens, my parents again noticed that something didn't sit right, as I was struggling in school with my learning, obviously, and at that time of my high school years especially, I had a few learning disability. It was thought upon or frowned upon that I had dyslexia, ADD, ADHD. I went to a specialised program that was run under South New Zealand at the time, and that was when I first went to see a specialist to get tested. During the series of questions and tests that was given to me, obviously based on this, that the specialist did also pick something up, but wasn't quite sure at times, so I had to do more series of questions, observing my behaviour and everything else as they do with certain behavioural challenges of certain kids and what have you. So, in that time frame, leading up to my last year of high school when I was 16, that it was then picked up that he thought I had Aspergers syndrome. As we know, Aspergers syndrome isn't now a diagnosis, as they removed that out of the DSM-5 manual completely as of the year of 2013. So Aspergers syndrome is now under the umbrella spectrum term of autism spectrum. You can listen and watch more here above me in the iCard or in the description below me, that I also shared my journey with Aspergers syndrome, as well as also in saying this based on Aspergers syndrome is no longer a diagnosis. Again, during my transitional stages, especially in my teens, shall we say, in my early teens, if you will, my parents again did notice that something wasn't sitting right with them about it, because I wasn't obviously socializing much with my peers and what have you. I did time and time again try to mingle, don't get me wrong, I did try to socialize with peers peers in my group. Some didn't accept me for who I am, and I tried to fit and blend in and mask my everyday feelings, thoughts and everything else and what have you, which is not really good in the way for autistics to mask on a daily, because it can be detrimental to their health, of their mental health especially. And during the time also, as I was transitioning for many years from when I was into intermediate high school, I got bullied a lot before the diagnosis and what have you. And I know for that many people may be on the autism spectrum society group that I've been in will feel the same. I feel alone and isolated. I didn't get invited much to parties, obviously, during my transitional stages from primary, intermediate, high school. I was fortunate for a time before the diagnosis to get a few parties here and there of invites from people, but not many, you know, and it was kind of hard because I wanted to actually feel accepted like many of us autistic. Anyways, as I said, basically, I was during the time of my primary, intermediate level of schooling, was struggling with the education system. Obviously here in New Zealand, especially the education system is a bit broken how to teach kids with learning disability. However, because obviously some of the tests that they do for, you know, kids is an old trial kind of educational intervention plan for kids to see where they're at in their levels, and they observe you and they actually see, you know, how you interact with your peers, especially with the teachers and what have you. But I'll share more hopefully into these kind of tests, what they're like and stuff, maybe in the next few series over in this series, so stay tuned for that if you want to know more. But continuing on though, but then I had a misdiagnosis between the ADD and the ADHD, however, but therefore I had to go for a specialised program that was run under New Zealand here at the time, and that was when I first began to see another specialist to get tested to see if there was anything else besides the learning disability. During the series of questions and tests that were given to me to do that, the specialist did pick something up but wasn't sure at the time, so I had to do more series of tests. 3 years later, leading up to 16th birthday, it was noted in there that I had Aspergers syndrome. As you know or don't know, Aspergers syndrome isn't now a diagnosis, however, as they removed this out of the DSM-5 manual in 2013. But in saying this, however, they do say that for kids that had been diagnosed as Aspergers syndrome from 2016 and below that year before it was removed, still some of them would like just had that diagnosis as Aspergers syndrome instead of maybe what it has come about today for Aspergers syndrome being under the umbrella spectrum of autism spectrum. During my time of getting the diagnosis, I did have a few support and services that had helped me through navigating through life with autism and some other conditions. Yet while I'm an adult today, this has become extremely difficult to find, as there aren't many services and what have you for adults or teens here in New Zealand with autism. But however, with some of the services and supports I've got in place today, I'm very fortunate enough. While I've got the diagnosis, it has been difficult, but it is a blessing versus a curse, some people will say, but in my case it's a blessing in some parts. Yeah, in some parts it can be a curse because of the lack of understanding and awareness of others, or shall we say the acceptance of others, people's differences of being different. Basically, also in saying this, it's hard enough for us females or girls usually getting a diagnosis at any age or stage of their life, because as I shared in one of my videos, that the reason being is because of the overlap of certain other conditions such as mental health conditions and stuff, as well as in saying this for us that we are good at masking and what have you, which I clearly shared more about it basically on my channel, which you can see it in the icon above me. So I'm going to hopefully share more about that in one of my series that will come up about autism, female and girls, you know, on the autism spectrum in either episode 4 or 5, so stay tuned for that if you want to know more. But please bear with me also for the maybe male listeners today while I'm sharing this out, that some of it is going to be addressed from an autistic woman perspective of her life with autism, and want to share her insights, what life is like for her in general, so that you can hopefully walk in her shoes and be empathetic enough and actually not just help me, but just to learn to understand maybe how I go about things, so it doesn't add any confusion. Just don't ever assume or think that I'm forgotten about the guys. There might likely to be some topics around the male later date after I just look into some more research. As I said, it will take time for this research, so I apologise. So let's get back onto track here. While I've been privileged and welcomed by some of the autistics from other groups in their community online, some hasn't. Bear with me on that. I've had some rough stages once I came out announcing that I'm autistic and what have you, what they've been through and what they shared with me, or even to others of their everyday personal struggles, etc. Right? So therefore I had trying to get into certain autism community groups online and trying to find some locally here where I am, but again, sadly there's not that many services in that, or shall we say community groups here. So therefore that's why many of us autistics here in New Zealand that I know of has been trying to actually create some groups around New Zealand, and I'm hoping to be in my future to do this as well. As one of my hopes group so that people doesn't have to struggle alone. Also in saying this, basically, while they've been sharing their personal struggles, that I feel that I'm not alone anymore, you know, despite having that aha epiphany moment, basically, way before I felt I knew I was autistic, that it was really hard as is to make friends along with connecting with others in the real world. As I said basically before that, it was a real struggle for making friends online and offline in the communities that I'm in. But now I'm starting to build and connect with some people around me who are different, and I can actually be more empathetic and understanding, because obviously I am known as an empath, and as an empath, for many of us will, you know, suck in every energy possible, be it positive or negative energy and what have you. But in this case, basically, like, as I've grown up, I've realized now I am more aware of my surroundings, aware of myself, aware of others, and understand of how getting a diagnosis of any kind that we need to find answers to can be a battle and difficult for some of us. Sometimes some of us may not even like what our diagnosis is at the end of the day, because obviously, as I said, it can be a blessing and a curse, especially for us coming to grips of understanding about the autism and coming an acceptance of ourselves, sort of thing. But again, that's fine, each to their own, based on our choicings and what have you. You know, we are all different, and that we need to just come to terms of what it is at the end of the day and find ways that we can manage it daily. No, I don't believe that we should have a cure. Basically, I've shared this in one of my videos, which I'll hopefully share it later today here on my podcast. So there are many questions lying about that you may be thinking and asking me right now, or even to yourself, as I share you with my personal thoughts and opinions on this particular topic. What is the definition or meaning of self-diagnosis is the very first one. Self-diagnosis is actually just diagnosing by yourself a condition or societal disability or disability without the medical professionals that are qualified in that area. There has been a lot of cases where people have done this, of the self-diagnosing on themselves. It can be done and has been done with many different conditions. There has been a lot of people that may have self-diagnosed themselves sometime in their lives without even realizing. A common example for them doing this is a common flu or a cold. Self-diagnosis is part of someone's life on an everyday basis due to the lack of recognition that this is part of being acceptable and being deemed as normal in today's society and the world around us that we're living in today. Autism self-diagnosis, however, in itself means just that, and that it meaning too many that are already autistic to be getting educated about autism, doing their own research and doing their own learning, and possibly talking to other autistics about their lived experiences with autism. All of the information that's being researched and gathered needs to be thorough and deeply researched of the information of one uses to self-diagnose be by a trusted and reliable sources, so to speak. If one was said to be self-diagnosing themselves, that sometimes some diagnoses can be misunderstood, as some may propose to show similar signs, symptoms, traits, characteristics, and more, yet may result in misdiagnosing the actual causal diagnosis, etc. Again, as I said prior to this podcast today, that sometimes with many diagnoses that come about, they have showed similar signs and symptoms, and it overlaps one way or another. So hence why sometimes it can be really hard, and then they'll just choose to put it into that spectrum of, say, example, my case, when I got this diagnosed, thinking I had, for the learning disability section of it was AED before it was fully classified that they felt it was ADHD. That being said, however, we need to be prepared and ready for a negative result or outcome of the diagnosis. Self-diagnosis process, when looking or even reaching out, etc., doesn't come with a confirmation letter, however, or a letter of approval. Far from it. It's looking for the truth and or answers, even if we didn't want to accept this at the very beginning when we were seeking out the answers for ourselves. You have also now got the digital world of the internet that has a lot of information that's ready in our hands and in our fingertips, as now we are in this digital age or era where this empowers many people to self-diagnose. As we know that there are a lot of digital resources and information that is readily available and isn't formally not to educate professionals but others who can find and process them themselves. Now the big questions are of the following to answer is, why do people diagnose themselves as an autistic? Just a quick note before I continue, however, on this podcast, just remember that these are based on my own personal thoughts and opinions, etc., as we know that there will be different of opinions to this topic that I'm sharing today, that we need to respect one another about it while this is up for discussion. And when this is up for discussion, please be kind to people that may decide to join the discussion in the comment section below. So I would like to hear your input and thoughts after I leave you guys today to have a think about. So number one is, I think for many people self-diagnosing is actually important because nobody else suspects autism and the diagnoses when these signs and symptoms show up. They may have been going to many specialists, be it psychologists, physiotherapists, or what have you, who who have a very outdated view on autism. Before we bring it up, we want to check up all our symptoms on ourselves to do that research so that we don't seem like we're imposters. We research so much until we are convinced that we are autistic. If you have the chance to get checked by a professional, you should definitely do it, but that's not possibly so for everyone, however. Number 2 is some people may say that the problem with self-diagnosis is that they may lead to self-medicating, which is potentially very dangerous for most people. Oddly enough, nobody brings this up, but people who have no access to support may be especially vulnerable to the idea of managing the symptoms themselves through different means. Some of these are harmless, but others are incredibly harmful. And this makes me really uncomfortable with the idea of self-diagnosis, as someone's saying here. Someone may get medication like Ritalin or an SSRI from somewhere and then overdose on it, thinking it will help them with their self-diagnosed autism. Someone may then find unreliable information online and try to do something dangerous without knowing how it will affect their bodies. Everyone who is questioning whether or not they have autism to see a professional as soon as if they believe they need outside support. You are an individual. Your journey through autism is going to be slightly different from everyone else's, so please do not risk hurting yourself by being so certain of your self-diagnosis that you go on to treat it yourself using substances. But the question then is, in this number 2 section, is what if you can't get the professional help on the professional level? What can someone do then? Again, I definitely may seek professional advice, but I don't feel it's overall clear cut. Number 3, some people could be curious about what they have done in the past, and it made them question to what they are doing as a normal behaviour, but it wasn't as normal as they expected, or that somehow that others may feel a certain way that they couldn't understand to why they were acting a certain way, etc. They feel lost or even alienated from society, and that people giving them their funny stares, look, etc. around the different people that they're socialising with. Obviously, many of them may start trying to look for answers starting from that point. Number 4, it may feel like a certain way that others don't. Number 5, they may feel lost in society or feel alienated and alone. They may want to find a way to fit in and blend into everything around them so that they don't look out of place. Number 6, the cost of getting to see a medical professional to get a diagnosis is pretty darn expensive, and also what you need to go through for the process for getting a diagnosis is even time consuming. Number 6 comes hand in hand under this one, as well as which professional diagnosis becomes unacceptable. This will then depend on every individual's circumstances here though, however, as this can become impossible due to the amount of hours of repeated travels, appointments, waiting, social interactions, asking and answering questions, being questioned about your life of your everyday struggle, weaknesses, deficits, or what have you. As we know that there are many autistic out there that are fine and managing and coping on their own, yet others struggle through with this, and for some of it is not doable for them, but they'll have to do what they have to do for them. Number 8, due to the lack of resources from professionals or even just professionals in general who studied autism, and even maybe some of them will lack in qualifying in the field of autism research. Number 9, professional diagnosis is right. What I mean here is that many years ago, when autism was known, it was known to be only a male diagnosis, but even was known or considered as a childhood disorder. For this being said or seen as a male thing, then you can thank Simon Baron Cohen based on his theory called the extreme male brain theory. Most of these biases still exist today, however, and many of us autistic advocates and activists are working extremely hard to debunk it all, and that we are making little progress in that front. But for many of us, it's too late, especially for our females. Girls and women of all ages are still being underdiagnosed, yet with getting an adult diagnosis, this is hard enough also to get one. 10, self-diagnosis can be there to a professional diagnosis. As we know that sometimes as we are children that we get taken to the medical specialists or professionals by their parents or caregivers or guardians or what have you. As an adult, we need to seek the professional help ourselves. First of all, without diagnosing, and then to start the process as a professional diagnosis will never happen. Self-realization will vary in different degrees of this on a different autistic person's circumstances yet again. Some autists may have an epiphany or an aha moment, something like, maybe I am autistic, let me find a diagnostician. You might find some of them may well do some intense and in-depth research before they reach out to some autistic community group, either online or in their own communities. Now on the other hand, to weigh up is what self-diagnosis isn't. So my point here are 1, it's not an uninformed decision. 2, not quick and easy due to the ones of having to without regularly do through research, without having to self-educate ourselves. 3, self-diagnosing ourselves is also known as a form of self-declaration for many of us. 4, self-diagnosing is all about not getting attention from others. 5, a non-autistic, however, knowingly while falsely declaring that they're autistic isn't self-diagnosing, that they're just plainly lying about the diagnosis that they're autistic. That self-diagnosing autism isn't harmful to the autistic community. Many people use self-diagnosis of the term to refer to anything that aren't actually self, however, causes and or create problems and needs to be addressed and talked about more collectively. Finding the right balance between the two can be extremely difficult, however, there sure as hell no simple answer. How do we ensure every autistic person realize that they're autistic, welcomed into that autistic community, getting the support that they need with or without an official diagnosis, and making sure that people that aren't autistic isn't abusing that label. 7. Another one is, if we were to self-diagnose, this will then cause some form of discrimination towards us and not getting the right accommodation needs for us, and also the right services and support. Another question is, why does self-diagnosing exist in the first place? That's a very good question. This is due to an ongoing and growing problem that has become serious with the official diagnosis or official diagnostic process that we have to go through for autism. The ongoing refusal from people in power of process of fixing these issues goes hand in hand with the problem that we are facing. The ongoing and continuing fight for liberation of autistic people plays a larger role in self-diagnosis, and that is becoming more common than we think and even realize today. We autistics are now fighting back with the non-autistic that think they have the power over us by deciding our life for us, gatekeeping our neurology and profiting off us without supporting us and our needs properly. Look, the classic example that I don't want to bring up all the time that I've been researching is all about autism. The question is, why is people oppose self-diagnosis? So number one is, some people abuse self-diagnosis. Some people may claim that they are autistic when they aren't, and then they start to spread misinformation about autism. A certain claim of being autistic will then become a sense for others, giving words of a certain validity when talking about autism, that then in turn will make it more difficult for others to be convinced that they're really spreading misinformation. Yes, I agree, this can be harmful and needs to be addressed and taught as well as being acknowledged here. Number 2, only professionals should diagnose autism. Some or many people oppose to self-diagnosing because that this should be left for the medical professional team and that failed to do so. We need to be free ourselves and our belief that professionals are infallible. The tools and methods that the professionals has been using to diagnose autism are based on decades of misinformation, incomplete information, biased information, outdated information that's being put together by non-autistic people. Question comes as, can people who self-diagnose themselves be wrong? Of course they can be. They're only human. They make mistakes. Non-professionals can access the information. The autistic community doesn't get harmed by non-autistics, which what is harmful is just what comes with the actions of that non-autistic person spreading misinformation about autism, and to me that really needs to be addressed, as this is the main problem, not a fake autism diagnosis in itself. Number 3 is, self-diagnosed autistic take away resources from real autistic. My oh my, where does this come from? This makes me a bit hurt and angered. Where did this come from to come to this conclusion of this theory or afterthought that you have put into place? I don't understand how or why they've come to this conclusion in the first place. Maybe you can explain me this in the discussion below if you know about it. My thought here is, if without a professional diagnosis, yes, there is or wouldn't be no support whatsoever put into place in the first place. All autistics deserve the support that they need, no matter how big or small they need it for. Well then, let me say this once and for all, for them only. In fact, nobody who has a need should be needing a diagnosis to get their everyday needs met, right? Think of it this way, whether autistic or not. Try internalizing and swallowing that bitter pill for a moment, figuratively speaking. How does that make you feel after I said this to you? Again, why are there not many resources around to assist us? This isn't because there are too many people who need them. It's the people in the power to make enough resources readily available for anyone that really needed it in the first place, who's not to do so. So please consider who the real enemy is here. Open up your eyes. It's not the self-diagnosed people of the autistic. No, far from it. Number 4, people who aren't autistic shouldn't claim that they are autistic. I get it wholeheartedly that some people that I may have spoken to, watch or listen to, oppose to self-diagnosing. Again, that's based on their own opinions and thoughts and what have you. After all, it's their choice of the matter, as well as having their own opinions based on it. I don't think any of us, for that matter, want any non-autistics claiming that they're autistic. The question comes, what are we really going to do about it? And is what you're doing really helping us autistics in the first place? Or is it doing more harm than good? Answer these for me. Another thing to think about in question is, how can we really prove that someone is really autistic? And then again, how can we prove that someone isn't autistic? The simple answer here is we can't really. Whether or not someone does claim that they're autistic or not, or has claimed that they have had a professional diagnosis, again, will not ultimately prove whether or not someone is autistic. There are absolutely no tests to be had or done diagnosed if we are autistic or not. As again, I said before, that all the techniques and methods that I said are us is really outdated and old. The key thing to remember here is that when we are starting to question autistic people's statuses, there's a few times that we are harming them. There will always bound to be something used or to be used against the autistic people to declare them as non-autistic, questioning the autistic that already has been used as a target or a weapon of some kind, and this is guaranteed deemed unacceptable by anyone of any nature. Even if there's definitely nothing, they're about to make something up to make others believe them. It doesn't matter, or it doesn't even stop there. If people lie about being autistic from doing so, no matter what, nothing does ever quite leave, quite frankly. But again, it does mean more harm than good. It's affected the autistic people if we were to target them and have their autism questioned. 5. People shouldn't call it self-diagnosis just so that they suspect that you are autistic. Some people does try to self-diagnose themselves has no problems with suspecting that they might be autistic, but many of them do, however, oppose again the term self-diagnosed. Whenever people say that they suspect or even may suspect they might be autistic, it should be used in terms to make it clear that one isn't professionally diagnosed, to secure strong limits demand. Furthermore, contrary to this belief that autistic people may always remain suspecting, questioning themselves, doubting themselves, being unsure of themselves, unless that they get a real confirmation from a usually non-autistic stranger to be considered to become valid. Last question you may be wanting to ask me is self-diagnosis, yay or nay? In my older world of mine, I believe wholeheartedly that there should be a free like accessible professional official diagnosis for every autistic person that needs it. There will need to be a total overhaul of redoings and reworkings of the official diagnosis criteria that has been done and should be processed by autistic people for autistic people. There would be autistic professionals somewhere out in there that would be diagnosing their autistic person, are more than happy to train more autistic professionals or just professionals in general. Then therefore, that being said, if this was to be done, there'll be no more room for discrimination, stereotyping, or even stigmatizing autistic people that may do the self-diagnosing on themselves. That being said, also again, that there will be accommodation needs being met, as well as many of the 3 support levels that are being based on their needs, as well as I mentioned about this in one of my videos, which you can see above me, of the 3 different types, as well as also I think in my podcast. You will be guaranteed that all of our needs then will be met, and then you'll have one happy autistic person and much more happy autistic person in general. I believe that this is something that we drive and work towards, yet this is a long way to go to achieve it, and much more of what we're advocating and what have you. I believe wholeheartedly though that every autistic person should be able to understand that they're autistic. I believe that every autistic person, including myself, deserves to be living a happy, healthy and sustainable life. Every autistic person is so deserving to have self-understanding, self-acceptance, not just from themselves but acceptance of others, self-efficacy, peer support, community and where they belong, inclusion, their right, having their rights included, not discriminated, accommodations, justice and many more that will open the doors for knowing that we're autistic. I believe wholeheartedly that in my honest and humble opinion here that self-diagnosis is to be more than just a self-declaration. While we're discussing this topic, that for me, I was on the fence of being for or against of the self-diagnosis, and meanwhile I had to do my own research, gain this better and designing myself all of this, as we know that this can be such a complex and difficult situation to get ourselves into. I will say today, I am happy to say with all the research I have done and gathered, and to self-teach and educate myself, as well as having to do others do so that share their views of this, that it is helping me to understand this more and more each day. One thing is for sure though, that I'll always contribute my best to advocate for autistics' rights and freedom, as this can't forever be achieved if non-autistic people from now and in the future will always be the gatekeepers of autism. Well, this ends basically the why people self-diagnose autism. Is it right or not? Hopefully you enjoyed this. Please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll be back with you shortly. So the main part of this video I want to quickly hopefully address, if I can aim to finish today, is, what is Patreon? You may be asking me. Patreon is a service or a membership platform for content creators like me that are creating vlogs or music vlogs or whatever form of outlet that they're doing, sort of thing, to pay a monthly fee towards as you guys decide to become a patron on board with things, to hopefully work towards anything that we want to do, be it behind the scenes, exclusive videos, what have you, live videos and whatever it may be. My sort of reason for you want to support me is just based on what I shared with you, is to educate and navigate through life with autism and mental health, along with also mentoring, supporting years and the like, as I said earlier. Also, I've been saying this with the Patreon, you get certain tiers based on a certain amount that we decide to put in, and within those tiers I will have certain things that will hopefully correlate, so to speak. So when you pledge me, this will cover, obviously, for what it will cover either the cost of my rent or backup supplies of my future endeavours of what I'm doing right now, that I'm going to share more of in the next video, which is my website creation versus my designs and some equipment I might need if I do create it as a business from home, instead of via through a spreadsheet. If you've seen those, that some of those might be in my home business. Haven't decided yet, but again, this will be addressed in my video. Another cost that will cover, basically, it will be my recording equipment via through doing vlog or even more on my podcast, as well as in saying this, maybe in the future for that equipment it could be maybe a new PC that I'm dying to need, as well as a new cell phone and whatever, as well as I'm saying that cover the cost of travel if I need to do some through my training in educational purposes of becoming an advocate, support person or what have you in future, to upskill my training if need be, because I've noticed that obviously in some places we need to actually train instead of having our lived experiences to be actually shown that we can do the work. Also, from saying this, it will cover the cost of my merch creations versus also via through the merch. If I have a certain amount that I decided that some of the percentage will go towards either one, to schools locally around New Zealand where I am in the middle, to maybe put forward to education specialists or what have you, to gain a better understanding about autism, especially where I wanted to do it, and also in saying this, maybe to create an educational program or some sort of program and create resources that is valuable to people to know about autism and so on and so forth. And also in saying this, maybe just cover the cost for certain medical specialist. That's where hopefully all the funding will go. As you know, there is always has been a continuation of change, hence why on YouTube it is harder these days to monetize, obviously due to the monetization process versus the analytics and everything else behind the scenes. So many of us content creators at this point in time are trying to find solutions to raise our own funds and do what we love to do the continuation work of what we do, regardless if it's music, what I'm doing right now as well. So in other words, also feel free to check my blogs and everywhere else to support me anyway, big or small. If you want to become a patron today, that is really good. If not, I'm not going to be disheartened. It's up to you at the end of the day if you really want to support my projects and causes that I'm doing. Also, in saying this, basically, as we know that this is important to me, obviously, to raise awareness and understanding about autism and mental health, especially again with the spectrum of autism, because obviously many of us statistics just feel that we need to be accepted, because we feel like many of us will get rejected by our peers by the misunderstandings, misgivings about autism. So hence why I'm trying to stand out like a sore thumb somewhere as an advocate, a voice for you all, regardless of what it may be. So that also I'm saying this, basically, I'm hoping with the content that I'm creating with you all, with the amount you pledge every month, that will go towards that and many other projects in the works later on, and make better content for you all, regardless of it all, as well as in saying this, to gain a better confidence level for myself, or in myself, and what I want to strive and achieve for, which is what I keep saying about, raising awareness and understanding. By supporting my cause and my channel and either the future projects or what have you, regardless where you find me, I believe wholeheartedly while we'll work together to break the stigma and stereotyping of autism and mental health, as well as just removing or reminding you guys that autism isn't a disability but a different ability, as well as continuing to educate you all while navigating through life with autism and mental health. Create a better life as well for myself and others around me by supporting all. So just a quick shout out of thank the very first patron that has been my lifetime member, is Mum Noise. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing the name right. Correct me if I'm wrong. This person is watching today. I appreciate this very much, and hopefully within saying this that some of the, like I said, pieces of funds will go towards my future works of what I have to do. And also to everyone that I have been associating with from the very beginning of my vlogging journey right through to now, I appreciate wholeheartedly with some of your support. I know I have been having a lot of naysayers along the way of what's been said about what I can and can't do, and that I have proved them wrong, obviously. And in saying this, based on this, your support, love and guidance means a lot, and that I wouldn't know where I'll be today with some of you that are still with me today, regardless of what it may be.